Did you know that in the early 1990s, Disney had plans to open a theme park in Virginia all about America? The proposed park was called Disney's America, and it actually has an interesting history because it sort of came from not the failure but the hardships of another Disney park, Euro Disney. You see, Euro Disney opened in 1992 and it was facing a lot of hardships. Aside from the fact that it was way over budget, it just wasn't performing as well as Disney had hoped. So the Disney company was starting to look into ways to more economically expand on their theme park business. You see, Dick Nudis had convinced Michael Eisner and Frank Wells to visit Colonial Williamsburg because he had ideas of making a theme park with similar themes. And they liked the idea, so they developed this theme park called Disney's America. Now, Disney did something cool, and they actually borrowed some tactics from Walt himself when he was developing the beginnings of Walt Disney World. You see, what the Disney company ended up doing was they purchased the option to buy land from Exxon. They purchased about 2,300 acres out of the 3,000 acres they wanted total. Now, the option meant that they weren't actually purchasing the land, they were just purchasing the right to buy the land later. That way they could sort of hold on to it and reserve it while they were planning the park without owning it and diving right in. And the strategy that they borrowed is that they never actually let Exxon know that it was Disney doing all of this buying, because they were afraid, like Walt was when it came to Disney World, that if they knew Disney was involved and they knew how deep Disney's pockets were, they were going to raise the price of the land and it was going to become cost prohibitive. So the area of land that they were looking to buy was 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C., which made a whole lot of sense because the whole park was about America and DC is the capital, and so it was fitting. The thing was, it was also 5 miles away from a Civil War battlefield where the Battle of Manassas took place, and it was also right next to Hunt Country. That doesn't sound like a big deal right now, but trust me, later on it becomes a pretty big deal. So with this location picked out, they started developing a theme park all around the story of America. This theme park was going to feature 9 different areas, all focusing on a separate piece of American history. It included a Native American village, a Civil War fort, a themed area based on Ellis Island, a turn-of-the-century state fair, a Midwestern American farm, and an area called President's Square, among a couple of others. And this park had some crazy ideas. For instance, one of the rides planned was basically a whitewater raft ride based on the Lewis and Clark expeditions set against the theme of Manifest Destiny. Another idea was to build a working steel mill that showed the industrious side of America while putting a roller coaster that rode through the actual mill itself. It also included some novel ideas like using the Muppets to tell the story of immigration through Ellis Island. The plans for this park grew and grew, and eventually the budget ended up reaching $625 million, and the plan included hotels, places to shop, and even houses. So why doesn't Disney's America exist? Well, remember earlier when I mentioned that this plot of land was near Hunt Country, and it was also 5 miles from a Civil War battlefield? Well, this ended up being a big problem for Disney. You see, people in the area didn't take too kindly to the idea of Disney building a theme park so close to a Civil War battleground, and they just didn't like the idea of Disney as a whole trying to tell the story of America. And the problem was, they were next to Hunt Country. Hunt Country is a really nice part of Virginia where a lot of really rich people live. Eisner himself admitted that this included some of the most powerful and wealthy families in America, including the Mellons, the DuPonts, and the Grahams. As he said, these were some of the best families in the country in a position to fight Disney over the idea of Disney's America. They had the money, the connections, and the resources to not only go to the government, but also the media to try and turn public persuasion against Disney. Not only that, but they own land so close that they had a personal stake in the outcome of this project. And that's why when Disney's America was formally announced, it took less than 5 days for over a dozen of the wealthiest families in Virginia to get together and form an opposition to the project. The reasons for their opposition were many, and they ranged from being concerned over what this project would do to the area in terms of having more traffic come to the space and having more development built up around it, the way you see in Disney World and in Disneyland previously. They were concerned with Disney's ability to respectfully tell the story of America, which has a lot of dark moments in it, and moments that don't seem like they were really fitting for an entertainment theme park. And they were worried about how close it was to the Battle of Manassas. Even though it was 5 miles away, the public perception was that Disney was essentially coming into town and plopping down a theme park on top of this Civil War battleground. They also had a problem with the name, Disney's America. Michael Eisner thought Disney in America was a really good mix. However, the public thought that calling it Disney's America implied ownership, as if it was Disney's story to tell to begin with. Disney considered renaming it to Disney's American Celebration, but by the time that came up, the project was pretty much all but dead. So why didn't the park ever get built? I mean, sure, there was opposition, but Michael Eisner was no stranger to opposition. He faced it just years prior with Euro Disney. The reason ended up being this sort of unfortunate convergence of all these different events happening really close to one another. You see, early in 1994, Frank Wells, Disney's president and the second to Michael Eisner, passed away in a helicopter accident. Prior to his passing, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells had a dynamic that was very similar to Walt and Roy, in that Eisner focused a lot on the creative aspects of the company, while Wells focused more on the operations of the company. And with his untimely death, that left an empty space in the Disney company. Eisner did take over Frank Wells' responsibilities after he died. However, there was still a big question in the air as to who was going to eventually replace him in the long run. As if that wasn't bad enough, later that year, Michael Eisner had to undergo emergency quadruple bypass surgery. Again, being as unexpected as Frank Wells' death, it threw a wrench into a lot of his plans for that year, including plans to further develop Disney's America. And then lastly, there was the departure of Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had left the Disney company. Now, Jeffrey Katzenberg played a large part in what we know as the Disney Renaissance, the era of animation between The Little Mermaid up until about Pocahontas. And to be honest, him and Michael Eisner's relationship could be the subject of a whole other video. But the short story is there was a falling out and he left the company. The three of these things combined left Eisner feeling like he didn't really want to subject the Disney company to even more drama, which was bound to happen facing this opposition. But hold on, that's not it. There were even more reasons as to why this park never happened. You see, when Disney's America was initially planned, the projections showed that the park would open and it would run profitably. However, when they revisited the financial situation, they realized that the more accurate projections were that it was actually going to operate at a loss. And this was for a couple of reasons. One, the location. It was up near DC, which meant that they had to deal with the northeast weather. And while they initially thought that the park would only be closed for 3 months out of the year during the winter, what they really learned after living there was that it was probably going to be closer to 4 months out of the year. On top of that, the attendance projections were slashed a little bit due to the controversy of the park even before they started building it, and a little bit because of their experience with Euro Disney and seeing how that didn't actually live up to their initial projections either. And then lastly, there was the newfound fees and costs that were going to be associated with the fact that so many people, and not only so many people, but so many wealthy and powerful people were against the project as a whole. This meant that they were probably going to have to fight every battle to get every sort of license and clearance and red tape cut. And they predicted that this was actually going to push back the opening day of the park if they were to actually break ground and start building on it. But even with all of these issues, they didn't matter as much as one. And it's the issue that Eisner himself pointed out, which is that it didn't matter who was right or who was wrong when it came to Disney's America. The fact was that they had lost the game of perception. The public was just not for the park. And so in 1994, Disney's America was canceled. Now, the good news is Disney is good at taking ideas and putting them somewhere else, and they're also good from learning from their mistakes, and there were definitely plenty of mistakes to learn from. And we have projects that are alive and well today that probably benefited from the learning experience that was the failed Disney's America. For instance, Eisner contributes a lot of the problems to the fact that they were secretly buying up options to purchase land before the project had even started. Because they were keeping it a secret, they couldn't really reach out to experts, and that meant that they couldn't get in touch with historians who could have helped guide the ideas of the parks before they announced it. It meant that they couldn't reach out to experts who could have predicted some of the fallout that would come from the public's perception, and they couldn't reach out to people in the government to try and get, some officials on their side when they were going to announce it. And that's why later in the decade, when they were going to push forward with Disney's Animal Kingdom, they knew to reach out to experts who could help them in the fields of animal health and animal conservation. That way they could redevelop their ideas in a way that would be more fitting and that they could get ahead of any sort of controversy before it even came up. On top of that, like most ideas at Disney, it never fully died. Later on, when they were thinking about adding a second park to Disneyland on the West Coast, one of the ideas was a revised version of Disney's America, and it actually included buying out Knott's Berry's Farm, which was a theme park not too far away from Disneyland, and sort of converting it. Now, obviously that never happened. However, some of the ideas did get to live on. For instance, there were plans in the State Fair part of Disney's America for like a classical wooden coaster, and that eventually became California Screamin'. And you remember that Lewis and Clark Expedition Whitewater rafting ride that I mentioned? That eventually became Grizzly River Run. So that's just a short look at the story of the Disney theme park that never was. Would you have liked to see Disney build Disney's America? Would you have wanted to visit it if they did? Let me know in the comments below, and also be sure to share any other Disney Did You Knows that you might have. You could also let me know directly on Twitter. I'm at RobPlays. And whatever you're doing this weekend, be sure to make the most of it because it makes it that much better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for the next Did You Know Disney. Bye, everybody.